Good morning, everyone. Hola a todos. Hello, my name is Carolina Araújo. I am from INPA, and I'm here representing the Commission of Gender and Diversity of UMALCA. We would like to thank the organizers of the Mathematical Congress of the Americas for this space to have this discussion here. And the goal today is to discuss diversities in mathematics. And for that, in addition to members of the Commission of Gender and Diversity, we will have two invited people, Pamela Harris and Monse Cordero. But before I introduce them, let's first introduce the Commission of Gender and Diversity of UMALCA. So this is our video, which you can find also in our webpage and also in our Facebook channel.
La Comisión de Género y Diversidad de UMALCA surge ante la necesidad de llevar a la práctica los objetivos planteados en el Protocolo para la Atención de Situaciones de Violencia y Discriminación de Género o por orientación sexual, identidad y expresión de género a aplicarse en todos los eventos de UMALCA. Dicho protocolo fue creado por las autoridades de UMALCA el 1 de junio de 2017 con el objetivo de explicitar reglas elementales de convivencia en eventos organizados o auspiciados por UMALCA en lo que respecta a situaciones de violencia y discriminación de género o por orientación sexual, origen, identidad y expresión de género.
Al reconocer que a pesar de la existencia de este protocolo, la comunidad ha manifestado de diversas maneras una inconformidad frente a las distintas situaciones de violencia, inequidad y discriminación, las autoridades de UMALCA nos invitaron en septiembre del 2020 a formar una comisión de género. Esta comisión estaría dedicada a promover la equidad y el respeto en los eventos de UMALCA y a buscar los mecanismos adecuados para solucionar las denuncias que pudieran darse siguiendo los lineamientos del protocolo. Decidimos añadir al nombre de la comisión la palabra diversidad, pensando que puede comprenderse en un sentido amplio e inclusivo de las diferentes realidades de los países y sociedades que comprende UMALCA, entendiendo además que las formas de discriminación no son solo por razones de género, sino que muchas veces se intersectan con otras inequidades.
Las matemáticas latinoamericanas que formamos la Comisión de Género y Diversidad de la UMALCA estamos comprometidas con los objetivos planteados y somos conscientes de que nuestro trabajo prioritario es la creación científica. Y estamos lejos de saber cuáles son los procedimientos jurídicos o psicológicos que acompañan este tipo de denuncias. Si bien uno de nuestros objetivos es capacitarnos como integrantes de la Comisión de Género y Diversidad sobre cómo abordar y derivar las consultas y denuncias, estamos convencidas de que nuestro trabajo principal debe ser preventivo y educativo, y con esto lograr, idealmente, que las denuncias no se den o se den en muy pocas ocasiones.
Estamos muy contentas de que nos hayan invitado a conformar esta comisión y sabemos que nosotras no representamos a toda la comunidad, por lo cual nos parece importante que los miembros de esta comunidad se vayan renovando escalonadamente para así poderle dar continuidad al trabajo realizado, pero también dar nuevas ideas y perspectivas.
Estamos convencidas que para lograr cambios reales en términos de equidad y respeto a la diversidad, es necesario el trabajo y el compromiso de toda la comunidad de matemáticas de América Latina y el Caribe. Y, sin ninguna duda, el protocolo y la creación de esta comisión son pasos fundamentales encaminados a que nuestra comunidad sea cada vez un espacio más justo, equitativo y libre de violencia y discriminación.
Okay, now that you have met the Commission on Gender and Diversity of UMALCA, I would like to introduce our two invited friends today. So the first one is Pamela Harris. She is an associate professor of mathematics at Williams College.
Hola.
She's also a faculty fellow of the Davis Center and the Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity. Pamela is also president of LATIMS, a nonprofit organization working to highlighting the research, teaching, and mentoring contributions of Latinas and Hispanics in mathematics. So I will let Pamela introduce herself. Please, Pamela, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor for me to be here today. And so thanks first and foremost to the entire Comisión de Género y Diversidad for the invitation to be here, and then also to the MCA for their support of this event. And so I'm going to go ahead and share, I have a few slides because I wanted to share some pictures. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And so I hope that that comes through on your end. And so I will give this presentation in English, but I'm very happy and eager to have more conversations in Spanish. Being in the US sometimes limits my ability to speak Spanish. And so I welcome any questions in Spanish at the end once Monse also presents. So I wanted to start today by just telling you a little bit about my story, because I like to say that I am an accidental mathematician. And so I want to tell you the story how I got here, because I think that that touches upon a lot of what I believe it was Andrea was mentioning, that the concepts of inclusion and diversity have to be intersectional in nature. And so I wanted to also acknowledge that in this story, a lot of the identities that I hold are there's a lot of them. And so I wanted to just put them on paper here for you. So I am a woman, I'm queer, I'm cisgender, I'm Latina. I also identify as Hispanic. I'm an immigrant, previously undocumented. And I'm also a first-generation scholar. And then I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a mother, and I'm a wife. And so there's a lot that make me who I am. And mathematician is one of those identities. But like I said, that became really an accident. And so I guess every story kind of starts at the beginning. So let me tell you a little bit about my trajectory to getting here. So I'm originally from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, and it is a beautiful colonial city. As a child, I remember having memories of just loving numbers. Like I remember my father challenging me with long division problems, and he would just keep adding digits, and I would have to do them by hand. And so that's how he kept me entertained sometimes, as he had a record store when I was growing up. And so that's what he would give me behind the counter. He would just like have a notebook and I'd have to do lots of division problems. And I should point out, both of my parents finished up to about 9th or 10th grade level of education. And so for him giving me that was something that he thought was fascinating, that I could figure it out. Or he would also challenge me with memorizing people's phone numbers, which is actually rather clever nowadays, because I don't have to memorize anybody's phone number anymore. I just put it in my phone and forget it. But as a child, he would quiz me, what's your tia Leti's phone number? And I'd have to just recite it. And he felt so proud that I could just remember everyone's phone numbers. But early on as a child, my parents' business went bankrupt. And so we left originally to go to near San Diego, where my mother had family. And so we moved to San Diego when I was about 8 years old. That was very short-lived. For those that understand the economic impacts of living in Southern California, it is a very expensive place to live. So we returned to Mexico. And shortly thereafter, we moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And their life was definitely very cold, but much better. We were able to have a decent quality of life. One of the things that kind of stick through with me in that journey, emigrating to the United States twice, was that I went to a lot of different schools. And so one of the things that ended up happening was that even though I was, I guess pretty diligent in my studies, having gone to about 10 different schools from 1st to 12th grade, nobody ever really took notice of whether I was maybe any good at many things except art, because somehow that was tangible. People could see the artwork that I was producing. And so early on as a child, people would tell my parents that I was talented, whatever that meant. I just thought I liked what I was doing. And so I made art. But it was really difficult as I continued in my math journey. I thought math was kind of the one constant thing. I could think about math in English and in Spanish, even though most of my math really has all been in English. The subject felt constant. It didn't feel like I needed to learn a different set of rules, like when I was in ESL, right? I have a vivid memory of the first time that I recognized that when I was learning my A, E, I, O, U in English, see, like it's so hard. I still struggle, but I remember the memory of recognizing that the letter I in English was not pronounced E como en español. It was I as an eyeball. And so in my mind, I associate, those lessons that I learned in ESL as being just so random. Like they didn't seem to make sense to me. But math felt like, oh, look, it doesn't how you explain it. And in which language you explain it, it's still the same thing. And so that part, I guess, was missing. I didn't have that connection to mathematics in a way that I was hoping I would have. Had I been maybe in the same school, I would have had some maybe better progression. The other thing that I'd like to point out, which is really one of the, I guess, key points in this short presentation for you today, is that even if I had the most welcoming and supportive and encouraging professors and teachers pushing me towards mathematics, in fact, I was undocumented. And so being a dreamer is what we now refer to as those students who were brought into the country, into the US, as young children, and they were here maybe unlawfully after possibly being brought in by legal means, like I was. I flew in, I had a visa. We overstayed our visa by about some decades long. But I was brought here by my parents. And so, at that time in my life, we weren't called dreamers. We were called very, very derogatory terms. And it was really difficult because I went through my entire educational journey really hiding that aspect of what I was experiencing. There was a deep, deep fear that if anybody ever found out that we were here and we were undocumented, it wasn't just going to affect me in getting deported. We were talking about my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad, my aunts, my uncles. In fact, it's still, I can't lie to you, I'm still nervous because there's still people in my family. As I speak publicly about these things, they're still potentially in danger. And so there's a deep level of fear and stress and depression that come with being a young child, thinking about your future. And sometimes we forget the privilege that we have when our immigration status is not in question. And so that was really difficult for me. And so in fact, I couldn't really think about attending college nor legally hold a job. And so, yeah, I felt quite hopeless during that time. And add to that a lot of discrimination, because then what ended up happening was I knew I was living through this. I couldn't tell anybody. But then I also started realizing that if I spoke Spanish, people associated me as a Latina with a Spanish accent as potentially undocumented. And so not having a perfect English could potentially put my family in danger. And so I spent summers trying to perfect my English, so that I would have no semblance of an accent. I changed the pronunciation of my name. I no longer was Pamela, I was just Pam, or I was Pamela, because again, that would prevent potential harm to come from to my family. And so I hope you can tell that it was quite a difficult time, but I kept, doing my studies as best as I could. And my dad thought we should talk to somebody in the high school and see if there's something they can do, something they can suggest. But in fact, the high school counselor was really not helpful at all. They weren't aware of any resources for undocumented students. And in fact, her advice, now in retrospect, I realize how sexist it was. Her advice was, well, your daughter's bilingual. She should just apply to become a receptionist at an office. And this was the advice that I was given. Rather than trying to find other resources for me, I was like, well, just default to, to being a receptionist. And so luckily for me, I did quite a bit of things, and you can read about them on the internet, so I could get into college. But I also had a wonderful partner. So Jamal and I got married shortly after we graduated high school at the age of 19. And that provided me, and in fact, my entire family, a path to citizenship. So he is a US citizen. And so I was able to really keep studying. And so I started at a community college, and my mathematical skills, because I had focused on art, were really quite bad. I didn't know, I couldn't remember that like multiplying and adding were different things. I was 17 years old when I finally like really grasped that concept, because everything had just kind of escaped my brain. I think trauma does that to you. But we tend not to acknowledge that. So that's how difficult that period of my life was. But I started and I took classes, and I was placed into an intermediate algebra course. From there, the teacher said, oh, you're kind of good at this. You should take the next class. And so I took college algebra, and that was supposed to be the end because I was finishing an associate degree. And the teacher said, you should take trig. And I was like, but why? I don't need it. And she said, but maybe you'll like it. And I thought, they know something I don't, I'll take trig. And then the trig said, take calc. And then I took calc. And then the calc 2 teacher said, oh, you should finish calc 3, and then you should transfer to Marquette to keep studying math. And then I thought, well, he knows best. And so I went to Marquette. And as I sit in the building, I'm currently at Marquette University visiting this summer, the chair of the department, she just stepped down as chair, but she was a brand new faculty. And she said to me, when you go to graduate school? And I thought, she knows best, I'll go to graduate school. And so I went and I did, and I got a PhD. And again, my life during that time was quite hectic. So my husband joined the Marine Corps. On the middle picture there, you see him leaving to go to Iraq. What you don't see is that I was 6 months pregnant. In the middle picture, he's returned after the birth of our daughter. He's visiting for 15 days in the middle of his tour of duty to Iraq. And then the last picture is me and Akira at my PhD graduation. And so I wanted to just share this story with you today because as Latinos, we sometimes, we all carry different privileges. And so for somebody like me, who's an immigrant to the US, I want to acknowledge that we don't all have the same experience when we move to the US, but we're still a united community. And so even for those that are international and come to the US for a PhD, please know that, I welcome you. There's so many of us here in this country, and we're so happy that you're here. But sometimes it might require that we prioritize those that are in most need. And so that might mean that we think a little bit about how to include people into our programming who might be undocumented. And so for those of you on the call who are organizing events, please keep us in mind, and please learn more about how you could support us. There's a wonderful website. It's a coalition of youth who are really a driving force for change. And so I invite you to visit unitedwedream.com. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and thank you again so much for the opportunity to speak to everyone.
Thank you so much, Pamela. This was a really inspiring. I'm very happy that you're here with us. So we will have some time for questions and answers before the hour is over. So maybe now I would like to introduce our second invited person. Please, Monse Cordero. Monse Cordero is a graduate student at San Francisco State University. So they are in the mathematics master student of 2022. And Monse, please tell us about you and your trajectory in mathematics.
Sure, thank you so much for the invitation to this event. And thank you so much for all the work y'all are doing to bring a little more equity to math. So I will also speak in English as is the main language of this event, I suppose, but I am also happy to take questions in Spanish. And then Carolina can translate if there are any Portuguese questions as well. I can't answer in Portuguese, but so my story is a little bit different from Pamela's in that I'm still a graduate student. I'm still deciding whether I want a career in math long term, and unfortunately, it has nothing to do with with whether I enjoy math or whether I feel like I'm able to do math. But right now, it's about choosing whether I actually want to exist within math culture as myself. I'm a queer person. I'm a trans person. I'm non-binary. I'm a Latinx person. Many more other things, but do I want to exist my full self in the mathematics culture I see right now? And that's a question I'm asking myself. I feel like I'm at a bit of a crossroads right now. But as I stand here, I think about 3 different stages of my life and my mathematical career, I suppose, and how they affect my thinking about math and what I want to do and be within it. So first, I think about my high school self. I joined Math Olympiad in my school because my friends were doing it. I liked math, but up to that point, I'd had trouble memorizing my times tables and things like that. So it wasn't super clear whether people consider me a math person or not, but my friends were doing it, so I did too. And I was 14 when I learned about proof by induction, and it just blew my mind. It was the most amazing thing on earth. You could just like actually prove these things. It wasn't just like someone told you, like you could show it. And it just completely like blew my mind and showed me just what math could be. I think it was incredible for me to see a different perspective. My friends in school saw math as like worksheets and memorizing and maybe sometimes drawing shapes. And I could see this whole other thing that math was, and I fell in love with it. But at the same time, I also was starting to see where I fit within math or not. And though the folks at the Costa Rican Math Olympiad always said otherwise, the overwhelming social message about math, and that is unique to math, was that you're either born a math person or you're not. And this is not something you can change. It's just a fact of who you are. And I was terrified that I wasn't. I couldn't tell. I was really worried that maybe I would just suddenly hit a wall and it'd be shown that I actually wasn't a math person. So even for the Math Olympiad team, I avoided studying, because then if I didn't do well, I could blame it on not studying. It wouldn't be that I actually wasn't a math person. It was just that I wasn't putting in the effort. But if I put in the effort and failed, that would say something about me, and I couldn't let that happen, which made me miss out probably on a lot of really incredible opportunities, but that's just where I was. I did, however, keep loving math. That was an incredible opportunity to me. I am really grateful for the Math Olympiad program back home. And so I moved to the US for college. And I was thinking of studying math. I wasn't super sure. And as I moved here, I was not only seen as a girl, but I was also seen as brown. I was also seen as an immigrant, and not an immigrant from like a fancy country. I was like, oh, you're a Latinx immigrant. Like, I was not really like math major material. I didn't see myself reflected in the department. So I started taking classes because I liked it, but I looked into what they recommended for math majors, and it was an honors track. But in order to be in the honors track, you had to have taken calculus before starting college, and I hadn't. It was not an option in my school. It was barely an option in my country. Very, very few people have access to completing calculus before college, and you would have to be in like a fancy private school probably to do so. But having not really thought about that, I just felt like the message was clear, right? Like I was not a math person. I liked the classes, so I kept taking them. And thankfully, during college, I also took some classes in math education, and I did some work in it. And that gave me just a different perspective because I learned about all these systemic barriers that are in place, all these systems that keep a lot of people out of math. And it allowed me to start seeing that maybe it wasn't all me. Maybe it was some systems that were in place that kept me out sometimes or sent me these messages that maybe I didn't belong. So that allowed me to kind of complexify my story of who gets to be in math. And that gave me enough to finish my degree. I finished it and I loved all the math that I learned, but I always felt disconnected. I felt disconnected from the department. I felt disconnected from math broadly. I never really had an advisor. No one ever told me about like summer programs. I was in my classes and then I spent all my time in college elsewhere. And not that I didn't have a great experience, but I was just doing math, but I didn't feel part of math. So I graduated and I kind of was like, okay, well, I'm done with math. I got this degree. I'm a mathematician now, I guess, but I'm probably never doing math again. And that's fine. I worked in math education. I was really committed, and I still am, to working to try to dismantle some of these barriers that exist in access to math. I was lucky enough that I still was interested in college, but for many, many kids, they're kept out way earlier than that. And so my work in math education, I always felt really passionate about trying to tackle some of those systems that keep people out of math and math-related careers. But then I think about my more current self. I was working in math education. I was loving my work, but I realized that if I was truly committed to believing that everyone could do math if they wanted to, then maybe that should apply to me. So I decided to go to grad school, and here I am. I find myself at San Francisco State, which is an incredibly special place. I, for the first time in my life, feel welcome in a math department. I feel part of it. I feel like I can do math and like no one around me thinks differently, which is a first. It also seems like a fairly unique place to me at this point. Within the department feel great. I feel shielded from all these external complicated things, but I'm kind of unsure about the community at large. At this point, as soon as I step out of the department, I start feeling those voices asking me again to prove that I belong. Why are you here? Are you really one of us or whatever? And on top of that, now as an out trans and non-binary person, I even feel excluded from a lot of diversity initiatives. There's so many summer programs and grants and things like that say they're for women, and I have no idea. There's no way for me to tell whether they're committed to gender diversity broadly and I would be welcome and they actually want me there, or if I'm just going to run into a super transphobic place that like is gonna, not want me there and specifically try to keep me out. And it's not that there shouldn't be women's only spaces. I believe there should be. I shouldn't have access to every space ever. They should, however, be inclusive of trans women, which is also not something that I commonly see explicitly stated. But the biggest issue to me is the fact that like people usually haven't even thought about the fact that I exist. I usually, will have to call up someone or ask someone to ask on my behalf whether I'd be welcome. And then even if they ultimately, usually they sound confused at first, they've never thought about it, they might consult and then say yes. I still don't know if it's going to be a space where the other participants are going to want me there, or it's a complicated space to be in, and it's kind of exhausting to figure out whether I belong over and over and over again for so many different reasons. And it's very hard to do math when you're not sure if you belong, when you're having to fight for space for yourself. Math is something that you need to have like mental space to do, and it's hard to find it when it's being taken up by many other things, as Pamela was saying before. So yeah, I'm trying to decide what to do with myself, and it has nothing to do with math. I'm loving my work right now. I'm having a great time. But when a community broadly sends me a message that, do I belong? Like, you should question this over and over at every turn. I'm not sure if I want to put the work and the emotional energy it would take to open a space for myself. And this is kind of a bummer, but if I could give you any advice on ways that I wish we were in a different place, one of them is that we have to actively fight against these social ideas of math. I think probably if you're sitting here this webinar, your heart's in the right place. I don't think you're here and you're like, well, we shouldn't let people into math. But the problem is what I was saying earlier, like when I was in high school, people told me you belong in math, but the overwhelming social message was about brilliance and about geniuses and about being born to do math or not. No one says you're born to do history. No one says you're born to do, like, I don't know, any other school subject, or you're born to do reading. Like, that's not a thing. It's only a thing in some very specific fields, and math is one of them. So even if you're in the right side, it's not enough to like know that. We have to actively push against those messages to help people truly feel like they belong. It wasn't until I was studying, some math education, like theory, and reading up and learning more deeply that I started to understand these systems that are in place. And I'm just lucky to have ended up there, but there was no reason for me to have done that. And I definitely wouldn't be here now if I hadn't been studying math education and worked in math education for some time. And secondly, just remember there are people different than you. And that sounds very silly. I think we all, big picture, know that. But if you don't know enough, if you don't like truly make an effort to learn about other people and other identities and the barriers they face, you might just miss it. And so I think learning about it, like actually committing to learning about other people and their difficulties they face, and also surrounding yourself with people who are different from you, especially if you're in a position of power, if you are running a scholarship or a grant or a summer program or a diversity initiative or any of the recruitment in a department, any of these things, if you don't actively think about seeking out people that are different, if you don't actively have folks in there with you who might be different from you and thus might catch other different axes of oppression that you might not be taking into account, it's not going to happen. So I think, I know there's a lot of people with their heart in the right place, but I would like to kind of encourage everyone, and like myself, this is hard work, to actively think about these things and to put in the extra work that's needed, because otherwise it's really hard to change a culture that's been in place for so long. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Monse. I think this was very inspiring, and we are discussing exactly about diversities here, and it's important to see that diversities is actually very diverse. So we had this two testimonials. So thank you very much, Monse. Thank you, Pamela, for sharing your stories, your trajectory. So we still have some time. So we have until 12. So it's time to open to questions of participants. So if there's the attendees are, if someone wants to raise their hands, if someone wants to say something, we can also invite you to speak. And I don't know if there are some of my colleagues from the Gender Commission, if they want to say something. I think if anyone also wants to, if someone is watching us, and you can also write to the commission, write emails to the commission, or write at our Facebook. Andrea, please. Do I have to do something? I have to. Yes. Do I have to do something to let you talk? Okay. Yes, please go ahead, Andrea.
Ok, voy a hablar en castellano. Muchas gracias, primero muchas gracias Monse y Pamela por contarnos sus testimonios, sus experiencias. Y bueno, más que una pregunta, me gustaría resaltar algunas cosas que creo que está bueno darles una segunda vuelta, que ambas mencionaron, ¿no? Como en el fondo nuestras propias experiencias nos van plantando siempre esta pregunta, como que Monse la mencionaba, como ¿pertenezco aquí o no? Y eso lo he visto mucho en matemáticas y otros quizás territorios que también están bien masculinizados,
Y creo que también es necesario darnos cuenta, algo que también Monse decía, de que esta pregunta que se nos instala dentro, al parecer a varios sujetos, nos quita espacio mental, nos quita tiempo, y eso también tiene un impacto en nuestro desarrollo, ¿sí? Porque claramente hay una especie de arquetipo, de modelo que calza muy bien en la subjetividad matemática. Tampoco, o sea, es raro también lo que pasa con las matemáticas, porque al parecer hay que calzar, hay una norma, una norma, y quien no calza tiene impacto en distintos momentos de la trayectoria, pero también en las experiencias, etcétera. Entonces, creo que quizás nos toca pensar más cuáles son los dispositivos de exclusión que quizás para otros sujetos funcionan justamente como potenciadores de su carrera. No sé, pienso a veces en las competencias, que quizás para los que fueron educados para ser genios, a quienes les dijeron que eran desde chiquititos que eran genios, las competencias funcionan súper bien. Pero ¿qué pasa en el reverso? Para quienes no funcionan bien, quizás es un dispositivo de exclusión con mucha fuerza que los tira muy lejos, y eso no debería ser así. Entonces, más bien quería instalar esa inquietud. Muchas gracias de nuevo por sus testimonios.
Gracias, Andrea. ¿Alguien más? No sé si Pamela o Monse quieren decir algo más de lo que dijo Andrea.
Carolina, perdóname. Hay alguien que tiene la mano levantada acá de los espectadores que creo que quiere hacer una pregunta. Patricia.
Patricia.
Santos.
Sí, espera, no sé qué tengo que hacer para...
Posso falar?
Olá, Patricia, por favor, sim.
Eu vou falar em português, daí qualquer coisa você traduz, Carol.
Ok. Uhum.
Eu queria perguntar tanto para a Pamela quanto para a Monse, o que eles, diante da experiência de vida deles, né, o que as pessoas, os professores, poderiam fazer para ajudar quem passa pelas mesmas situações, né? Porque a gente não imagina o que eles passaram, né? Mas, enquanto professor, formador de opinião, como que a gente pode auxiliar os nossos alunos?
Okay, maybe I think it was, thank you, Patricia. I think it was the question was very clear, but in any case, let me just do a quick translation to
I can guess, but I would appreciate that.
Okay, so Patricia, from what I understood, Patricia works as a teacher, and she is asking for some advice for the people that are in her position of what she can do, or what can we do in general as educators to help people that are in on the other side. So as she asked for both for Pamela and Monse for some general advice.
Yeah, I think one thing that would have been very helpful for me is learning about other people that share similar identities as mine who are in mathematics, because I think part of the challenge that Monse was pointing out too is also a lack of representation. So if you're already being explicitly told sometimes that maybe you're not good enough to be in math, but then in addition, you don't see people like you in math, then it's just really terrible. It comes from, every single angle that you look at. You're alone, you're isolated, and then you're made to feel like you don't belong in those spaces. But maybe if you're still made to feel like you don't belong in those spaces, but you have this glimmer of hope because you know some people who have made it through, the impact of role models is huge. We know that. And so one thing that I would say is, I've been working with LATISM, so it's LAT for Latinx, HIS for Hispanic, MS for Mathematical Sciences, so latisms.org. And we've been featuring people who are mostly US-based, but we definitely have some Latinx-based mathematicians. And so I think I would just encourage teachers to take time and talk about people in mathematics, current living mathematicians who share a lot of different identities. In the US, we also have mathematically gifted and Black. And so these are Black scholars in the mathematical sciences that you can feature as well. And then there's also indigenousmathematicians.com. It is a very new group, and I'm really happy that they have a website up and going. And so I think really illustrating the people that are in the community so that people can find role models. And I think that's one important thing to do among many others, but that's the first that comes to mind.
I think for me, the main thing I'm thinking about now is, I was thinking about how my experience is different now in a department where I feel more welcome compared to before. And I think the main thing is I feel like I can bring my full self into the department and into the classroom. I think before I've felt like I can bring my mathematics, right, that I'm expected to, and that was fine. I enjoyed that. But now I feel like I can be my full self in the classroom, and that's very abstract, right? How do you do that? But I think talking about just like letting students like talk about their experiences and connect to the mathematics in their lives. And those are very different for all students, but just hearing them out and acknowledging that, like, you know, I'm a teacher myself now. I teach freshman math, and realizing that, you know, sometimes my students can't do homework because they have to work. They have jobs. And this is not who we imagine as a mathematician, but there are people out there that, you know, why not? Just because they have to work outside of school, they might be mathematicians too. So kind of just opening our minds to who can be a mathematician, and understanding that no matter who walks through your door, they can be mathematicians too, and letting them bring all of that into their lives. I love teaching calculus, and I mean, pre-calculus, what I'm teaching right now, and there's a lot of like work on, you know, basic functions, and hearing students tell me like, oh yeah, like my family business, we look at sales graphs and they look like this sometimes. They're just like talking about that, just bringing in the things in their lives has been great for me as a teacher and as a student. It gets more complicated as you go into higher math, but still just letting people they're their full selves, asking, you know, really asking how people are doing, taking moments to realize when there's like big news out there, when things are hard in your country, taking a break and saying like, how are you doing? It makes me feel like I get to be a person and a mathematician, which shouldn't be two separate things, but feel like it sometimes. And I think additionally, I would have found it really helpful if more of my math teachers talked about how they struggle, talk about the times when math is hard, because a lot of times you just show the solved problem, but you don't show the 35 attempts that made no sense before that got you to what you actually solved. So that upholds this idea that you're a genius, right? You're a mathematician because you get things right the first time, and they're like immediately correct and incredible. And if we don't show all the other parts of being a mathematician, there's no way for students to know. Like, how would they guess that that's what being a mathematician is like? So I think it's hard because it means being really vulnerable, right? If you're a teacher and you're showing your mistakes, that's really hard. But I think that would have made a massive difference for me earlier on if I'd understood that when I found homework really hard, it didn't mean that I wasn't cut out for this. It meant I was learning, and that my teachers had that experience themselves when they were learning. So I think those are a couple of things about just, or I'm trying to come up with a couple of examples of how to have like whole people in your classroom, because that can be really hard to feel alienated. Sorry if I ramble too much.
Gracias, Monse. Thank you, Pamela. So this is something that you said that strikes me very much, to be your full self. I think this is something that I think we probably all of us have encountered at some point. It is sometimes we get separated from parts of our nature, and would be a much healthier environment if we can all be our full selves. There are some other questions here. So let me, there is a question. Let me just open here. There is a question by Guillermo Cortiñas. I'll just read his question in Spanish, and then I guess I can translate it if necessary. So Guillermo asks, a veces compartir la pasión por un problema en matemáticas sirve para olvidar las barreras. Quería preguntarle a Monse si ha tenido ese tipo de experiencia. Monse?
Sí, o sea, si no fuera porque de vez en cuando se me olvida todo, porque las matemáticas son tan hermosas, no estaría aquí sentada. 100% para mí eso es súper importante, tener esos momentos en los que puedo nada más sentarme y olvidarme de todo y hacer matemáticas y ver la belleza de todo esto. Y lo que yo digo, desde que aprendí a hacer pruebas por inducción cuando tenía 14, que fue así como, wow, hasta, no sé, hoy cuando me siento a trabajar en mi tesis y de pronto entiendo algo y esa sensación de entender una cosa nueva es maravillosa. El problema es que, trabajar con otras personas, yo no sé, Guillermo añade aquí. Sí, claro, para mí eso ha sido súper importante. Eh, Creo que en mi undergrad yo trabajé muy sola todo el tiempo, eh, por esa parte de como de sentirme aislada, pero eh, es una de las cosas que me hace sentir muy bienvenida en mi departamento ahora, es trabajar con otra gente, con mis compañeros. Eh, el único problema es que las barberas aún están ahí, me olvido de ellas por un tiempo, pero eso no significa que desaparezcan. Um, entonces creo que sí, que todo esto, que un problema hermoso, que trabajar con otras personas es la única razón por la que sigo haciendo matemáticas. No significa que eso sea suficiente, um, que es difícil de aceptar a veces, pero, pero creo que sí, mantener todo eso y tener aliados es fundamental. Y, pero creo que también hay que recordar que pues las barreras están ahí, digamos, son sistemas de opresión que nos mantienen afuera o que nos mantienen sintiéndonos como que no pertenecemos. Eh, y pues hay que luchar contra ellas, incluso fuera de todos esos momentos que sí, por supuesto, mantienen sintiéndome como que puedo hacer las cosas.
Gracias, Monse. Ahora creo que hay unas preguntas en el YouTube. Espera. Eddie, ¿quieres leer la pregunta? No la puedo ver ahora.
Si quieres la puedo leer yo.
Sí, por favor, gracias.
La pregunta es de Luz Baloyes y dice, la representación es importante, pero ¿qué pasa con las fuerzas institucionales que siguen excluyendo a las mujeres de las matemáticas? Me imagino que será para el panel completo.
Gracias.
Yeah, so maybe I just translate it, but yeah, so, and I think you have it here, Andrea. So representation is important, but what about the institutional forces that keep excluding women from math? They're real and they're not going away, and we have to fight them. The challenge is that we need allies. We can't have women who are the ones that are being affected by this, non-binary folks who are being affected by this, be the ones that are leading the charge constantly. Because we just heard this comment, and I echo it as well, which is if we're supposed to be doing mathematics, we're being taken hostage emotionally, constantly by all of these external things that are affecting our ability to focus on the math. And so we all have the exact same 24 hours a day, but when I'm spending 10 processing microaggressions, sometimes they're not very tiny, sometimes they're just straight up discrimination, harassment. When I'm having to spend 10 of my hours of that day processing what is happening to me, there's very little time left for me to focus and hide in a beautiful mathematical problem. And so those are the privileges that some folks in our communities can just go and hide in their office and not have their door open and not have these experiences happen to them. And yes, those are all institutional, right? And they're systemic, they're barriers. And I think Monse has been pointing this out, you know, and thank you so much, Monse, because it's like, this is the conversation we need to be having. So how do we disrupt these systems that have been in place that have kept certain people out, that have kept those of us who have stayed in pain? And the thing is that I feel like the longer I stay in math, the more I realize that that's really where I maybe can just focus my energy now. But that wasn't true 5 years ago when I was still trying to go through tenure. right? Because if I deviated from the things that were valuable in my tenure and promotion, that might mean that I am no longer here. And so there's this tension that those of us who have a lot of identities are facing, which is you're asking us to produce good mathematics, but at the same time, you're asking us to solve systemic issues that we are currently going through. And so what I would say is, like, please, those of us that hold more privileges in this math community, you need to be the driving force for change. Do what Monse has suggested. Learn more about issues of systemic racism, systemic discrimination, gender exclusion, right? All of these things, learn about them, and then figure out how you might make change in your local community. Because it also can't just be that we're trying to fix something that's like the math community at large, but start at least with the things that you have some control over, meaning do no harm to your own students. Make them feel welcome, bring them into a safe environment and community. Like Monse is saying, she's thriving, they are thriving in this community at San Francisco State because they've been welcomed into that community. They've been made to feel whole in that community. And so we have lessons to learn and things to implement in our own communities to make sure that we're doing no harm. And really, starting there, start local, and then that'll spread out. And hopefully, if we do that enough, if there's enough people making change in this way, then the community at large will change.
I would just like to add to that. I mean, there's very little to add. I think that's very much what we need to do, which is very hard. But it's to add that, like, intersectionality means we all have different privileges. And so sometimes that'd be really hard. Like, sometimes I'm exhausted of having to be the person again to ask whether you're including trans people in your inclusion or not. And, I've had my advisor say, like, do you want me to ask on your behalf? And that is just the most incredible favor, because then I don't have to be the one to hear the answer, because honestly, it's so tiring. But also, I'm also an immigrant here, but I come from a lot more privilege in some ways, right, than other folks. And so maybe that's a time when I can put in the work to raise the voices of those who are also immigrants, but, are not considered, they're not doing things right or don't have the right whatever. And so, like, those are times for me to put in a little more work because maybe I'm less likely to get hurt by those things. So to continue to remember that we all have privileges in different ways and how we can use it to help each other out, because sometimes it can just be really exhausting to be the one that has to speak up for yourself over and over and over again.
Muchas gracias, Pamela. Muchas gracias, Monse, por las intervenciones. Hay una pregunta de María Isabel Cortés. La leo en español y creo que está claro déjame leer la pregunta. Hola, muchas gracias a las panelistas. Me gustaron mucho sus intervenciones. Tengo una pregunta. Quienes trabajamos como matemáticas, debemos usar el inglés como el idioma oficial del trabajo, independiente de si vivimos en un país de habla inglesa o si estudiamos en uno de esos países. Esta misma conferencia es una muestra, por ejemplo. ¿Creen ustedes que esto genera barreras más allá de las idiomáticas? ¿Creen que eso sea una razón de privilegio en la comunidad matemática internacional?
Sí. No sé qué más decir, o sea, creo que sí. Creo que eso es una cosa que yo lo veo en haber decidido venir a estudiar aquí. Eso, para mí, primero que nada, hemos estado hablando sobre cómo las matemáticas son iguales en diferentes idiomas, pero para mí, yo mi primera clase de matemática en inglés, que fuera cálculo, fue dificilísimo. Me costó muchísimo cambiar como ese chip de escuchar, aunque sean los números, o sea, ni siquiera tenían que ser cosas muy complicadas, pero escuchar los números en otro idioma y entender que eran, o sea, no sé, tener que estar traduciendo al principio todo y luego empezar a acostumbrarme ya a poder procesarlo en inglés, fue muy difícil. Y lo veo con esa experiencia mía y el privilegio que me ha dado ahora hacer todas las matemáticas en inglés. Y lo veo comparado con con mis amigos que se quedaron estudiando en Costa Rica y pues, digamos, tienen sus carreras matemáticas también, pero no siempre se les ve igual que a mí. Aunque tengamos el mismo background, aunque, digamos, por haber estudiado yo en inglés, en matemática en inglés, hay cosas a las que tengo más acceso, punto, y eso es un gran problema.
Sí, mi
Gracias.
respuesta,
Sí.
perdón. Sí, mi respuesta es igual. Claro que causa problemas. Y no digo que las matemáticas se me hacen como igualitas en inglés que en español, porque ciertas palabras no me las sé. He tratado de dar charlas de matemáticas en español y me quedo, bueno, ¿y cómo se dice whole numbers? ¿No? Y alguien me tiene que decir enteros. O sea, que me pasa también, Monse, muchísimo. Pero lo que sí pienso de esto y me hizo recordar algo que me pasó a mí durante mi proceso a doctorado. Y creo muchas escuelas en los Estados Unidos tienen un requerimiento de lenguaje. Uno tiene que traducir y leer algún artículo y los lenguajes aceptables son francés, alemán, ruso. Y yo me quedé, ¿pero por qué? Porque esos son los 3 lenguajes aceptables. Entonces, lo que terminé haciendo fue, habíamos tenido una persona de México que vino a visitar y dio una charla en inglés, pero yo había hablado bien con él en español y le dije, oiga, ¿no se le hace esto como muy raro? ¿Por qué no podemos hacer matemáticas en español? Que no existe todo Latinoamérica. ¿Qué tal portugués? O sea, ¿por qué no? Y él dice, oh, pues deberías de preguntar. Y yo dije, pero preguntar, uno puede preguntar si yo soy el estudiante de doctorado y aquí dice por escrito que esos son los 3 lenguajes aceptables. Pues encontré a la persona adecuada, le hice la pregunta y le dije, pero ¿por qué no se permite el español? Ustedes me están diciendo que no hay nadie que está haciendo matemáticas en español en el mundo. Y se quedaron así boca abierta. Oh, bueno, pero si puedes encontrar a alguien en el departamento que te administre el examen en español y tú lo traduces y ellos dicen que pasas, tú lo puedes hacer en español. Gracias, había alguien que tenía colaboradores en España, él es americano, pero habla español, y él dijo, claro que yo te hago el examen en español. Ahora, recuerdo otra vez lo que habíamos hablado, que estos son problemas de sistema. ¿Por qué esos son los lenguajes adecuados? ¿Qué otras universidades están diciendo y mandando mensajes a estudiantes de habla hispana que su lenguaje no es lenguaje de matemáticas? Ese es el mensaje que estamos dando cuando decimos que el inglés es el único lenguaje aceptable para hacer matemáticas. Eso está muy mal. Y tenemos que cambiar el pensamiento desde ahora. Y el sistema.
Gracias, Pamela. Gracias, Monse. Gabriela, ¿quieres decir algo? Gaby Araujo.
I only want to say in English or in Spanish that the people who study all the career in an Spanish country, whatever, I studied in Mexico and after in Spain, always feel some discrimination, always. That it's very difficult to feel at the same level to the other people. Es un problema muy fuerte y siempre, bueno, yo al menos ha sido algo cuesta arriba para mí todo el tiempo porque todos mis compañeros hicieron algún doctorado, postdoctorado en un lugar de habla, o sea, donde se habla inglés. ¿No? And I want to share that with all the people here.
Gracias, gracias, Gaby. Bueno, primero, sorry, I'm changing the languages now. I got a bit inspired after this 1 hour conversation. So we are actually getting to this end of this 1 hour. So first of all, I would like to thank so much Pamela and Monse for being here with us today. It was very important to hear you, and I'm glad that we are having this conversation. I would like to also thank all the participants for being here with us, and I hope that we can carry on this conversation. So let's before we end, maybe we have time to put our videos, us from the Gender Commission of Umalca. So are we all have our cameras on?
Sí.
Okay, so again, I would like to thank everyone for being here with us today. I would like to thank again the organizers of the Mathematical Congress of the Americas for giving us the space to have this discussion here, and all of you for being open to it. So thank you very much.